Every once in a while you see a project on YouTube and you say, by golly, that's really cool, that's really neat, I want to make that. This is one of those. I'm going to make that. Hello friends and fellow woodworkers. I want to save you some time and effort and energy because this MALOOF joint build is something I've been wanting to do for a couple of years. Now, Paul from Canadian Woodworks has built a number of stools and a number of chairs, all with MALOOF joints. And he may have done a couple hundred of these joints, but this is my first time. So I'm going to show you the trials and tribulations of the things that challenge me in this build. They should benefit you because you're building it for the first time. You're like me. I went and searched YouTube for all the MALOOF joint builds, and there's only 18 of them. Lo and behold, Paul's made 3 of them that are the best quality videos. But yet, he goes through at such a speed, there's things that you don't know that you learn by doing. I'm going to show you those in my build. The mistakes I've made, the tips I learned, the little cuts and angles that are key to making this just right. So this video is going to be quite long, probably 30 minutes. But I'm going to show you the things that you need to know. So you want to bookmark this, or you want to subscribe to this channel so you can come back to this video when you're ready to do it. Do your research, watch the video a couple of times, and you can be successful too. So in my first one I make mistakes, you need to learn from those 2. I'm looking forward to building my second one. Here on the table are all the tools I use in making the MALOOF joint stool. Some of these are special sizes, so please make note of these. I will leave a link for you in the show notes below so you can get these on Amazon or your favorite retailer. So I bought the pattern from Paul. I got a piece of walnut, and I'm going to proceed to flatten it so I can start the MALOOF joint. Here we go. Yep, that's me. Sticking my head underneath. Make sure my bit's making contact with the slab. First time you ever flatten a slab on one of these jigs, it's a real learning experience. You know you're going to screw it up some way or another. But this is pretty foolproof. It just takes a long time to figure out how big a cut to take, how big a slide over to move, to where you can get this to be smooth on one side, and then elevate your slab enough to make sure you get it cut. So I sped this piece of video up 4 times speed so you can see how it works when you're trying to take off enough to level your piece. So you can see on the piece closest to you, you're taking off about 1/8 of an inch, and the other side you're taking off nothing. And so you do this a couple of times. You have to adjust it every time, lower your bit, and just replicate it until you get it nice and smooth cut all the way across. So after I had my walnut flattened enough to where I could have access to keeping it flat on all sides, I did a rough cut out of my piece. Later I learned I should have had a corner a little bit wider to have a longer flat spot, assist in cutting some of the corners, but that's part of the process. I bought the plans. I've got the template for the seat. I've got the leg template. I made my MALOOF joint jig. I got my seat blank. I'm ready to go. So let's build it. You take your template and you mark out your joints on your blank. So this is a piece of walnut, it has some sapwood, and I purposely selected this because I thought it'd be a neat transition to have a little bit of this sapwood in the corner of the legs. So now we have these. We have to come in here and mark our center lines. Then we can take the bandsaw and cut our curves to begin the joints. So prior to making my bandsaw marks, I marked the 1.5 inch line in red so not to touch that. So I don't want to do anything left, right, or in the meat of this because I'll do curves running this way on the bandsaw, and the router will clean up all that. In my excitement to get going and cut these curves and be able to break all that out, I made my first mistake, and that was cutting the curves wider than they needed to be. They're only supposed to be 2 inches wide, and I cut them all the way to 3 inches. And you'll see my repair fix later on in the video. So after the bandsaw, that's what your joint looks like. You got 3 of them ready to go for the next step. So these are my leg blanks. We got to cut this trim off so this joint would fit right into our seat blank and create a little bit of arch out, and then it will be trimmed later. So we're going to cut this now. After having assembled and built this stool, I learned that this one cut would have been a lot easier cutting on my table saw rather than the bandsaw. I would have had a much longer, straighter line to be able to base my front of the joints going into the Maloof stool. Next, we'll take these over to the belt sander and sand that smooth and get all the rough marks out. So I was prepared to use the jig. Leg hole is cut too wide for this. The total is supposed to be 3 inches, so we have to cut it 2 inches and use your router bit to hog out a 1/2 inch on each side. So I'm going to repair this by going ahead and cutting this to the 3 inches and come in and put some repair pieces on the sides and come back and recut it. So now my excitement has faded as I had to come back and cut this at a full 3 inches to be able to hog out the error that I made and be able to glue into pieces to repair the part I wasn't supposed to cut. Here's my solution to the overcut. Is I put in a couple of pieces parts here and here, 3/4 inch, and they'll be trimmed to within a 1/2 inch. So we have that on the 3 areas that we had overcut. So my repair job worked out well. We had replaced or placed in these 3/4 inch pieces will be trimmed to 1/2 inch. So this is the clamping side vise with a match fit dovetail clamps to be able to clamp larger pieces vertical. So this is how this guy works, like this. Now I have this all clamped in here. Now I'm going to flush cut these 2 pieces here. So I finished trimming all my maple pieces because of the mistake I made by cutting it too wide. So we have all those cut and trimmed. Next step is be able to take it over and put the 1/2 inch router bit in it and cut our dados. This is the rabbiting or slotting bit from Whiteside. 1/2 inch cutting length, 1/2 inch cutting depth, 1.5 inch large diameter. It's part 1922. Here's a little trick of mine for being able to tighten up your collet with one hand. I bring my fence up here and I put my bottom wrench up against here, so I'm turning it this way. So now all I have to do is tighten this one upper nut and it tightens the whole thing. The key to this is to have the bottom of this just below the level of, so when it starts to show, this particular task, I'm going to have to make this router bit come in here and get all the way around over here on this side. So I'm going to have to remove my router fence so it doesn't get in the way. Wow, That was scary and fun both at the same time. That was so cool to be able to cut this out. It's just a neat feature I've never done before. Anytime you do something the first time, it's always a little bit scary. But when you're in the midst of it, you realize how fun that was. So now we got to fit the legs on. Perfect fit for my leg. Let me tell you how I got the perfect fit. Put this on my planer and plane this down close. Instead of risking putting it on the table saw and cutting too much, came over here to my spindle sander, put my leg up against here. All I'm doing is getting this side absolutely smooth and just fine tuning it. Do it 2-3 times until you get a perfect fit. No real risk of cutting off too much. The spindle sander is the way to go for fine tuning that fit. I'll do that on the other 2 legs. It'll be a lot quicker. So I got the first leg cut around all sides and I have it in here. We still got a few little tight places in here, so I won't slide all the way up here, but we'll have to fine tune that with a little chisel work. So that looks good for the moment, so we're gonna let that one rest while we go cut these other dados on the other 2 legs. Here's a unique issue that I have. This slot fits front end this way into the piece. So this goes in first. This is 2.079. The backside is larger than that. It's 2.12, so we know that this is going to be too wide because it flares out. That's not good. So we're going to use, the cut saw to be able to smooth this out. It's a perfect tool for the job. So I'm shaping the inside joint on this maloof joint that you're not going to see. No matter how much I carve away, it won't be visible. You're just going to see this edge here. Just confirming that I had it in too tight. This one piece that I had in here, I had glued in. I broke off trying to hammer it in because it was too tight. So now we're gonna go back and have to redo this piece here. So I used my flush cut saw to cut it out and repair it. So as I get ready to cut the round over on these corners, I realize I've already made one tactical error, and this angle that you see cut on here is really not long enough or flat enough for here, because on Paul's original plans, these things were drawn much longer than mine. So I'm going to have to attempt to hold this flat on this surface a lot longer than you would if it was cut with enough runway. So we'll give this a try and see how it turns out. So you just hold this thing as best you can. Always use the push blocks when I'm on the router table. Don't want to get any fingers, any squishy things close to the blades. Now we're just tapping it in to see how our fit looks. All right, here's how to tell where you're tight. These pressure points, the wood rubs up against it there and there. You can see the walnut actually leaves a brown mark there. And as it slides over here, that thing's still a little tight. And we got a couple on that side as well. So we'll rasp these down a little bit. Get it a little bit more so we can get it to fit. Okay, after cutting on my round over on the inside of the legs, number 1's the tightest fit. Number 2 went in really good. It got about half, maybe 3/8 of an inch adjustment. Number 3 fit in perfectly. So it was what I thought was the loosest is the best fit. So I still have to work on this. Get this inside trimmed down some, and this one as well. And then we'll get to shaping. Cut saw, baby, cut saw. Okay, as far as the leg length on the stool, we have our legs in, and I have one of them cut to what I think is going to be the height. So there it was 16 5/8. So I marked it on this board, to get it to show that distance, and then I put it over here, and on that one you can see we're about a 3/4 of an inch too long, and then this one over here maybe 3/8 of an inch. So those can be trimmed a little bit before we go to the next step to get them the right length. Okay, so we have our legs fitted, so let's show you what we got on here. So on leg number 1, we have a little bit of loose gap in here, and in my diagnosis, that's due to the fact that this face was not flush. So we're touching here at the center, but over here where our edges are a little bit gappy. We'll think about how to cure that. And number 2, we have pretty good fit all the way around. We got a little bit of a gap over here, but that edge there looks real nice. And then number 3, it looks to be the best fit of all. So as they say, third time's a charm. So now the next step is to take our legs off and shape them some with the front and back. And we need to draw our lines on there so we don't overcut them. Okay, so here's what the stool looks like after I did the first trim on the legs. And so what we did is trim this outside here and the inside part there to give it that nice bow look. And so they yet to be trimmed down to size this way, so it'll be about 1.5 inches on that. Now I'm going to make my legs 1.5 inches wide, so I have center marks, and so I have this 1 1/4, and so we're going to mark it up to here on each side. So I have all 3 of my legs marked. These 2 I have marked on this side because I can hold those up when I come out over here. This one here, because this flush cut wasn't very smooth, I couldn't hold this up and be smooth enough, so I'm gonna cut it on that side. After you have your legs fitted, you can go ahead and shape the seat as much as you like for your joinery, and this way it'll save you some time a little bit later on. Okay, we just got all our parts cut and trimmed down. Now let's go ahead and put our dry assembly together and see how it looks. Hey, now we're talking. So I take each of my legs over to my sander, and I want to sand them smooth enough to get rid of all the bandsaw marks, because what I'm going to do next is take it to the router table. Now I don't have the elevated donut that Paul has when he makes his leg cut. You just do the best you can. In lieu of the donut, I found that it's more effective for me to take the router to the piece. Now we need to do this edge and that edge. And this was the straightest and flattest spot where I could register the base of my router. So we're going to go off that and put the round over on this right here. So in this part, I'm putting the round over on all 4 edges. And this helps shape the leg with a little more uniformity with the router bit, rather than trying to freehand it with some of your grinding tools and sanding tools. So this is just something to do on all 4 sides on all 3 legs. pretty good start. That'll work good. Get a little round over there. We'll smooth that with our other methods for our shaping. Now we turn the leg over and do the other side. Okay, I've done a practice clamp up. Make sure we got clamps that'll work and everything. Got all our joints ready to go. All right, got joint number 1 there and getting ready to do that. This is the reality of what your glue up will look like. I have these little wedges as gap fillers. They have a little bit of gap on this side right here. So I did nothing but just wedge it in there so it'll fill up and be the same color as this maple here. So we have that there. Then on this side, we had some on here and it had a couple around the curve. So we just got little bitty wedges and just jammed them in there and gluing those in. So we had one little chip out here on the walnut. So we fixed that while we're at it. So this is what you wear when you're ready to power carve the MALOOF joint stool. So let's go.
So this is the part I suggest everybody start with. You leave your legs long enough, you get out your cut saw bit on your grinding tool, and you practice on the knobs that are long. You're not going to screw it up, but you need to get the feel for the grinder and see how it cuts, because this is something you don't want to screw up. So I basically went and sawed off the other 2 knobs to be able to make it faster, and now I'm getting down to the real nub of grinding and shaping, and you can see my shape on the side I have marked there, and I grind away that to be able to get this to have some sort of shape that looks nice and pleasing.
So I was able to get started on the shape on our edges and did a little bit on the legs, trying to get these guys to be flush right here. And so on the edge, carved down a little bit. You think it's a lot when you're doing it, but maybe, I don't even think it's a 1/2 inch. So the goal is to get down a fair bit farther. Okay, after the first day of power carving, we got a nice little reduction in the seat fold here, and we want to come down a fair bit more. We did a couple of roundovers on the leg fronts, trying to get those a little round. And on the other side, we had a couple little folds in here, trying to get this down. We'll work on that more today.
To give you a little bit of a reference of my method for power carving, I found between the legs I was creating an oval by going back and forth to be able to get the shape between the legs, as that was a part that would have been the lowest. And so you created the nice swerve to be able to have that shape. And then I'll come back in a little bit and do a shape in a different direction. So I wanted to give you a live action so you can see the pace of which that I'm carving this. And this cut saw grinding disc is absolutely fantastic. This is something that I would highly recommend. It has a nice aggressive, stay sharp forever sort of grinding bit.
So what I find, the more you do, the more comfortable you get, the more aggressive you can be. So I'm trying to reduce this edge down, and I'm trying to get the shape to go just wide of the leg width all the way across to have a common shape on the taper. So what I found was the best way to do this is I'm trying to lower the section between the legs. I would kind of go in an oval pattern and concentrate the weight on the edge, because that's going to be the lowest point. So I initially did the oval this way to get that. You can see I have a high point here and here, a little tiny one here. Now I've got that down. I'm doing my oval this way up to the top and back to start to lower this seat and leave these parts just a touch high. So oval left and right between the legs, and now between the low spot and the center of the seat. I switched to an 80 grit sanding pad here to work on smoothing this out, and that works really nice. So I have a 80 and a 120. So you just really need to lightly touch it and to smooth it. So I'm working out all the bumps. You can see I have a bunch of bumps over here from the cut saw disc because it's real aggressive. So now I'm gonna come over here and work on smoothing that out.
So after a couple of days of power carving and a little bit of sanding, you can see I have a nice shape on the seat. And so it needs additional work in here, but we're just down to the 80 grit. We need to come back in with the 120 and do additional shaping. This is the bit I use from cut saw to shape the legs. Absolutely fabulous. So in carving out these little indentions so you can get this transition to be nice and smooth, I found that this width of this ball burr is about right. That needs to be there. So you can see over here on this one, it's far too skinny, so I'll have to come in and pare that back some right there. So I have the transition pretty good from where the curved part down to the base of the seat is. So the next part is to come in here and shape these legs to get this piece here to be flush going up that way. So working on the legs next is what we'll have to do. That one's about it. So I think with the ball burr, I'm just about done with it. We'll have to use it for final touch-up on a couple of items. But as far as the leg transition to the seat, it's probably best I can do with the ball burr, and now I'm gonna switch over to a different sanding method. So I have two files or burr sticks, whatever you want to call these from cut saw. They're super. So this transition ridge I'm working on right here, I'm just filing down with these to get this big bumps and lumps before I get to the fine sandpaper, which would take a lot longer. So these guys really do a wonderful job getting this transition ready for the sandpaper. You want this part of the transition to be nice and smooth, so when you run your finger over, you don't even feel the joint. So you want to start with the transition on the legs and just get your sanding disc on it to smooth that out to where it's nice and flat with the curve of the inside of the leg. Then I'll take the sanding disc and shape the outside edges of the stool. And then I'll move on to the bottom to create a little more of an arc by just having my sanding disc again on the bottom with a nice little oval shape. And that just shortens or creates a thinner edge for the stool.
Okay, we got a little gap right here where we didn't quite have a good fitting, so we're going to show you how we fill that. We're going to put a dab of glue in here, and then we're going to get some of our sawdust, and we're just going to put a light little touch right on top of that. So basically we're just coloring that glue, making our own colored glue. We're just squeezing that into the crack there. You can use your finger if you want. That sawdust absorbs that glue quite quickly, so it gets real sticky, kind of dries real quick. So we're going to do like that, and then I'm going to show you what we do. We're going to come along and sand it immediately, be able to get rid of that. I see one little dab right there. Get that filled in. Okay, so we got the patch going. Now let's do the eraser. There you go, solid fitting, no gap. So here's the stool after the progress I made yesterday, being able to sand the legs. So one of the things I really worked on was getting this transition here just right. And so we worked on that, and so this looks pretty good, but it requires a little bit more sanding. And while the top looks perfect, there's still some lumps and bumps in here for the transition that I have to get smooth. So now today, that's going to be the part we're going to have to do, is get our sanding pad out on our sander, sand away. So now we go to hand sanding, and I'm trying to get each one of these arch shapes smooth front to back, leg to leg. And so I'm using 150 where I've used 80 and 120 on my sander. Now we get to the finessing part of these curves, make sure they look consistent.
So after the final sanding, I did a mineral spirits wipe down several times and blow it off several times to make sure we can get all the stuff off that. So I finished it in Rubio monocoat with 2 coats and a final wax coat of Johnson wax for a nice sheen to make it glisten and glow. In addition to the table saw and bandsaw, these are all the tools I use. Remember, I'll leave links in the show notes so you can go and find them.
Well, that's the Maloof Stool video. So I hope you enjoyed that and you learned something. And if you did, give me a thumbs up. And when you build yours, send me a note and let me know what you learned from the video that might have helped you. Or if you had different issues, let me know what those were. Hey, if you want to see more of my videos, consider subscribing down below. And as usual, come back and see me real soon.